Hello, and welcome to the Bite-Sized Theology Podcast Extended Edition, episode 34. Coming to you from three fellas who are the Russell Stover's chocolate with the pink goop in the middle. It is Thursday, the 18th of June. I'm your host, Aaron Lively. Joining me this week is Sage Blaylock.
I'm pretty sure I've seen a short film documentary about that chocolate.
Sounds familiar. This is an inside joke, by the way. No one else will get this.
Doesn't have to be inside.
Yes, it does.
You too.
It has to be inside.
Oh, no. And John McCord.
It has to be an inside joke. It's funnier that way, Sage. We're doing it out of friendship.
Yeah.
And self-preservation.
All right. Brilliant. So glad to have the two of you who have never been on this podcast before on this podcast. Time for a quarantine ranking. As is tradition. How would you rank your quarantine experience on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being the absolute worst thing imaginable, and 10 being actually better than normal life.
10 is better than normal life. So 1 is the worst, but 10 isn't the best. It's like not perfection. It's just above
perfection
average.
Is unattainable. There's no way.
Y'all's rankings. Sorry, Sage. Go ahead to your millionth decimal point.
Oh, no, you're good. So it's gotten less hot the last week, which has been a huge rating buster for me. It's been very hot in Ohio. And I've watched some really good movies in the last few days, and it's been pretty nice. So I'm gonna actually bump up to 9, no decimals.
Wow,
what big day on this
Incredible.
podcast!
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
History's been made.
Mostly the no decimals part. Incredible.
Yeah.
How about you, John?
We are in the midst of moving. So right now I'm podcasting from my brother's house, which is a beautiful, beautiful house. And if you hear my niece in the background throughout the podcast, you're welcome because she's adorable. And yeah, so I'm going to go right now about a 5. I'm average, working a lot and moving and not getting a lot of sleep. But it was a great weekend this weekend, so I'm doing good. I'm chipper. I'm not chipper often, but you should say that I play for the Braves because I'm chipper.
Nice.
Amazing.
Nice. Chipper
Amazing.
at a 5. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I usually run about a 4.
Yeah.
The numbers don't lie.
If you're chipper at a 5, what are you like at an 8? And the second question, have you ever experienced an 8?
I have experienced an 8. And that was marriage.
That was just an 8, huh?
It was just an 8.
Damn.
10 is perfection, right? And so I'm a flawed human being, so we haven't hit a 10 yet. It's purely me dragging down the 10.
That's why I made 10 better than normal life and not total.
See, I'm on
perfection.
my own scale though. I don't go by your scale. Your scales don't make any sense. You're I don't know. You're like the scales in Monty Python. That the chicken weighs as much as the woman. That's your scales. My scales are real scales. I'm Lady Justice blindfolded with immaculate scales. You are a British sketch comedy scales.
The funniest British sketch comedy scales of all time.
Oh, I'm not arguing that. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'll take it. Fantastic. I think I've leveled out at about a 6.
All right.
Fair enough.
No explanation necessary. Here's one anyway. I moved back in to my current place. Here we are. Nice. My first day back. First day. Hello.
We're about to be neighbors, man.
We are. That's pretty incredible. I can't wait. Right. We're going to be able to do this in the same room unless one of us is too loud.
Yeah, we can't figure out that technology. We're not there. We'll be in the same place, different rooms.
That's right. Yeah, that works great. Fantastic. Well, good to hear your quarantine rankings. So again, like I said on the last episode, and we'll continue saying for the next few, we did an episode on George Floyd and on Black Lives Matter, and the issues of racial injustice and police brutality have not gone away. And it takes it takes effort to actively work against the systems that we've created in our culture. So even though protests are starting to become less broadcasted, and they're still happening though, and it's our responsibility to join our Black brothers and sisters in actively working against systematic injustice. Because I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're red or blue, racism is an affront on the gospel. It's not what Jesus stands for. And so if you have yet to give or listen or serve, go back and listen to that episode. There's some of the resources available, and listen to people who are better equipped to talk about racism than we are. But that is the serious note. Thank you all for watching and listening. Yes, you can now watch us. So please check us out on YouTube. We are at, just search Bite Size Theology. You'll find us. I think. We'll see. I think we're at a rockin' 13 subscribers right now. So,
Let's go.
Kick up those numbers, baby. Like and subscribe, and join us on this horrible ride that you're in for. Also, in case you did not hear on the last episode, we have reformatted the podcast a little bit. We are now releasing a bite-sized episode once a week, and are releasing an extended edition once a week. So more extended editions, slightly paring back the bite-sized episodes, and most of our writing going forward will be on our blog, which you can check out at bitesizetheology.com/blog. Or the blog. I think it's the blog. Just go to bitesizetheology.com. There's a blog button. All right. So here we go. It is now time for the moment everyone has been waiting for. Least of all me. Our opening segment is
Aaron's Sports Corner.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For those of you who do not know how this game works, Sage and I are giant sports nerds. Aaron is just a regular nerd. So we ask him questions about sports because he has many great qualities, but knowing about sports is not among them. So we are going to ask him 3 questions, see if he gets it right. If he does not get it right, then Sage and I have a question, have an opportunity to answer the question. If Aaron gets the question right, it's worth 2 points. Sage and I get the question right, is worth 1 point. So, Aaron, how you feeling? You think you're going to take us down today?
I feel less than optimal. Thanks for asking.
Okay.
We'll see how this goes.
Yeah.
I'm not like, I can't say I've like looked at sports information ever, but especially not this week.
So you haven't been grinding through sports almanacs since the last Aaron Sports Corner?
I have not trained. No, not trained at all. So I can't wait for this.
All right. I'll ask the first question, and then we'll go to Sage. So, Aaron, what is the only sport to be played on the moon?
Whoa. See, this is a fun question. It's a fun question. I'm still going to get it wrong, but it's a fun question.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with golf.
That is correct.
Oh,
sir.
yeah.
Nice. 2
See?
points. Golf
Take
is
that.
the only sport to be played on the moon.
Take that.
It makes sense because it would be a very easy sport to play on the moon because there are so many holes.
Everywhere. They're also like, yeah, they're everywhere.
Yeah. All right. Aaron's got 2. Sage, what you got?
All right. So the theme for my list is going to be the NBA playoffs. John and I are huge basketball fans. I am very excited that the NBA is probably going to happen until someone gets the coronavirus, and then it's going to stop. So I am focusing on NBA playoffs. NBA playoffs.
Great.
Now, what's going to happen is I will give Aaron the first shot. He will have a very easy version of the question, and John will have a modified version of the question. So,
Ready.
let's start. Number 1, Aaron, who is the all-time leading NBA playoff scorer? Who has scored the most points in their career in the NBA playoffs?
The most points. Kobe Bryant. May you rest in peace.
That is incorrect. John,
Dang it.
you have to name the top 3.
All right. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. LeBron? Is that right? Is LeBron the second one?
Who's your third?
Third would be Michael Jordan.
There it is. LeBron James is number 1.
Yeah.
Michael Jordan, number 2. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, number 3. Point for John.
Yes. All right. Our score is Aaron 2, John 1, Sage 0.
Crushing it.
Aaron, all right. What is the most popular sport amongst nudist colonies?
Oh, I know this. I'm just kidding.
All that research I did. Finally.
That's the only research I did for this segment. Most popular sport at nudist colonies.
This is not a joke. It is an actual factoid.
Huh. Volleyball.
That is correct.
Nice.
Are you serious? All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Wow.
On fire.
I'm just thinking of what I would like to play if I was in any of these places. So, and it's working out for me, apparently.
I was going to say that is your best sport, so maybe you missed your calling to be a volleyball star.
It's entirely possible. Why am I even here?
All right. So, dang. I'm sorry, Sage. Aaron is crushing it. He's got 4.
Yeah,
What's your question?
We're getting destroyed here. So number 2, which player recorded the most assists in playoff games in their career? Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, or Scottie Pippen? Which of those 3 had the most assists?
Ooh. I'm going to go with Scottie Pippen.
There it is.
Woo!
Yeah, he's
There it
crushing
is.
this.
Oh my
I know.
gosh.
I know. John, your version was going to be you'd have to give them in the correct order, which would have been Pippen, shockingly Kobe, then Jordan.
Really? I wouldn't have guessed that.
I know. That's why I was on the list.
All right, we're going to the final round. Aaron with a commanding lead of 6 points to John's 1 to Sage's 0.
My sports knowledge is encyclopedic.
All right. Aaron, a baseball game, on average, takes over 3 hours to play. Or it takes 3 hours to watch, to consume on TV. A game usually takes 3 hours. How many of those over 3 hours are actually spent playing the game of baseball? So an entire baseball game takes over 3 hours. What measure of time?
Are we going like minutes?
Yeah.
We're judging by minutes? Okay.
Yeah. How many minutes is actually them playing baseball?
Oh, I'm going to go with half an hour, 30 minutes.
That is incorrect. Sage, what's your guess?
Gosh.
11 minutes.
So I'm going to give it to you. It is 10 minutes.
Oh, I was so close.
Yeah. 10 minutes.
That's why I go to baseball games, because I don't even have to watch anything.
I like that my incredibly overly conservative guess was still too far. Like it was too much game time for baseball. There's a reason baseball's dying.
Yeah, well, it actually is 9 minutes and 55 seconds. I just rounded up to 10.
That's incredible.
It's good stuff.
All right. Sage, you finish this out.
All right, here we go. Number 3, Aaron, listen carefully. Until Michael Jordan scored 63 points in a memorable 1984 playoff game against the Boston Celtics, a Lakers Hall of Famer held the playoff record for single-game scoring in the playoffs with 61 points. What team did he play for?
Lakers?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. It's like,
John.
wait.
John, do you know who it was?
Who scored 61?
61. Did it in 1962.
So it would have been Wilt the Stilt.
It was not. It was
Jerry
not.
West.
It was the pre-Michael Jordan, pre-Dr. J, Elgin Baylor.
Ooh, Elgin Baylor. You don't. He's one of those names that you constantly hear about being really good that you know nothing about, like Oscar Robertson
Absolutely.
or
Yeah.
Bernie. You know, like, yeah. All right. Congratulations, Aaron, for crushing
With
us.
8.
What can I say? I did my research.
Apparently.
A lot of field studies in nudist colonies.
I went to the moon, and that was also a nudist colony. So I learned a lot.
It's true. There are no clothes on the moon. Can confirm.
None whatsoever. Good luck finding a place to get them. All right. That was Aaron's Sports Corner, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it. Now, it is time for our main topic. Our main topic this week is actually going to be on something called Christian liberty, which is a fancy way of saying we're just going to talk about some behaviors that some Christians do and some don't. And there's some disagreement on whether ethically any of these behaviors are worth doing. What situation would you and why wouldn't you? At best, it's a healthy conversation and a debate, and people who are Christians will agree to disagree and move on. And at worst, if you've got an unhealthy church environment, if anyone's like caught doing those things, they get labeled a certain way or looked down on as being like less of a Christian. So some examples of what I'm talking about here are like alcohol consumption, the type of movies or TV that we watch, the use of strong language. So I think it's important before we get started to read a pertinent passage from one of Paul's letters in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 23 through 33. And he says, all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. Let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising any question on the ground of conscience. For the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. If one of the unbelievers invites you to dinner and you are disposed to go, eat whatever is set before you without raising any question on the ground of conscience. But if someone says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, then do not eat it, for the sake of the one who informed you and for the sake of conscience. I do not mean your conscience, but his. For why should my liberty be determined by someone else's conscience? If I partake with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of that for which I give thanks? So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Give no offense to Jews or to Greeks or to the church of God, just as I try to please everyone in everything I do, not seeking my own advantage, but that of many, that they may be saved. So yeah, and before we get started, I think when it comes to this topic, it's hard to say there's a one-size-fits-all approach for everybody. That's not what kind of like the perspective we're coming at it from. There are people who are devout Christians who indulge in these things and some who don't, and for a variety of reasons. So we're going to talk about some of those specifically, others more generically. But I guess my first question to you guys is, what is the difference between something that could be considered a Christian liberty kind of behavior, one that's a little more lenient and relaxed, versus something that's actually sinful and wrong? And why do we get those confused?
So I think our culture largely, and probably most every culture in human history, struggles with the concept of moderation. So,
Such a good way to put it.
yeah, so things that fall under Christian liberty are things that when engaged with in moderation are not harmful, to the body, or not harmful to the mind, to the soul, do not sort of change and distort your view of God or your view of reality. So I think the church, the institutional church at least, often looks at these sorts of things. And if there's a chance that someone could go too far to one side, for alcohol, for an example, they're worried that a bunch of people are going to get drunk all the time, or some people are, drunks who are hurting their families or things like that. It seems the only way that the institutional church can handle those things sometimes, and has been the case in the past, is to just outlaw it totally, completely. Because if you say drinking, for example, is just bad completely always, then in theory, people wouldn't do it because they know it's bad or sinful. And of course, that never works out. Google prohibition and just read about it. And people who I think it's natural for people to question authority, and that goes within the church. Devout Christians within the church that would still question authority. Younger people question authority, of course. So if you put up those boundaries, there's always the fear that people who otherwise wouldn't have abused these things, because they're being told not to, feel this urge to do it anyway. And of course, that's another set of problems. But I think the question of, does moderation apply in this specific topic? If it does, if it's a question of moderation, can it be used in a way that is not sinful and whatever the exact opposite of edifying is, then that's something that falls into what I think is the Christian liberty sort of area, which is like, it's possible to do this without being sinful. Whereas something that's sinful and wrong, like murder, there's really no moderation in murder. Murder's just wrong and sinful. So that would be how I would sort of draw the distinction there.
Well, we've done the thing where we've said don't lust, so you can't dance, right? Mm-hmm. Or you can't get drunk, so you can't drink a beer or a glass of wine. And in the words of Sage, that's not how alcohol works. But I understand why it happened, right? Because you want to cut out those pitfalls for people. And also the Bible does list things that you shouldn't do, right? And the Bible does list things as sin. Probably a lot less than we'd think of, especially in the transition to the new covenant.
Yeah. And I also think, just a clarification real quick. So I use the word, the institutional church uses these things to control by restricting this. I think there's a lot of that, but there's also, in terms of like individual motivations, is a sense of protection, and pastoring is to keep people from doing these things to protect them. But continue.
No, for sure. That makes great sense. And I think a lot of it comes out of a place of like parental, like a spirit of parental rendering almost. Mm-hmm. But I don't, it's probably just the Scots-Irish in me, but like, I don't like that at all, because I think people should be allowed to come to their own conclusions. And I think we have a culture, where we think it's more important for people not to go for our kids not to go smoke behind the school than to love Jesus, rather than like, I would rather have my kid love Jesus and smoke behind the school than not smoke behind the school and not love Jesus, right? Mm-hmm. And so we get in this legalistic culture, which is not helpful. However, it is true that if you love Jesus, then you won't do certain things. And they lay that out in the Bible. A good tree bears good fruit and a bad tree bears bad fruit. However, we've taken that and we've cut out the Jesus in it. And we've just said, bear good fruit, just do good things, and then you'll love Jesus. And it's like, no, you love Jesus, and then you start to do those good things, because it's not an act of works, right? It is, you don't earn your own salvation. And it's just hard though, because in some circumstances, so for example, I was working on a small island off the coast of Panama, and there was like a tribe of people there who genetically, if they drank a beer, would get incredibly drunk, and like in a bad way. It was just a genetic thing. It was kind of a I don't know, genetic anomaly. So there, if you're pastoring a church in there, are you telling people don't drink at all? Because there is no moderation, right? But then in something like our culture, and really especially
or a church in Ireland.
Or a church. But like, what I mean by that is for our age group. So if I come up to a young adult, especially a guy who is around my age, and I say, hey man, I would like to have a 2-hour intense conversation about our feelings. That's not going to go well. If I go up to that same guy and I say, hey man, I'd love to grab a beer with you. That's the same thing. Mm-hmm. We're going to sit across the table from each other. We're going to spend 2 hours looking at each other's face and talking about things. And there's not going to be a TV on. There's not going to be a distraction. It's just going to be us staring at each other and conversing.
Yeah.
Like, that is a great opportunity for ministry and discipleship and evangelism. However, I know that a lot of people who I tremendously respect in my life, and a lot of people that I consider mentors and teachers of mine, would disagree with me wholeheartedly in the fact that I could go sit and drink one beer with somebody. And, you know, I don't hold that against them. I don't think that they're necessarily wrong, but I don't consider myself wrong. Otherwise, I would change my behavior. I think that it really depends on your cultural context in the realm of things that the Bible says don't do, right? So like, we can't go get drunk every night and think that we're honoring Christ, right? But we can go sit across a table with somebody and drink a couple beers with them, because that's not how alcohol works.
Yeah, contrary to popular belief, when Paul said to Timothy, hey, you can have a little bit of wine for your stomach, and when the Bible says don't get drunk, those don't contradict each other.
It's a shock for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you all touch on some really interesting things in terms of moderation. And I think that this also comes back to what is something that we've culturally always been told being raised in the church versus what is actually in the Bible about these things. So it like comes back to the Bible in a lot of ways. What are you always taught? What's actually in there? Like if you're raised in a conservative church, you might be told like drinking is wrong. Mm-hmm. But if you read the Gospels, you'll find that Jesus would turn water into wine at a party, like good wine too.
Which I was taught was fermented grape juice. True story.
Wow, that's incredible.
But yeah, I mean, that's unfermented.
But see, that is a perfect example of that happening. You know, like I think you hear, and I think the same thing with like something like strong language. You know, you might hear like strong language is like wrong in all cases. That's like one of the commandments, like don't take the Lord's name in vain, even though that could mean something completely different. But you find some of like the English translations of the Bible, like they don't do justice to some of the strong language that actually is in the Bible. Like Paul, John, one of your favorites, and mine too. It's hilarious. Paul telling the Galatians who are getting hung up on the issue of circumcision being a requirement for salvation, saying he wished they'd just cut the whole thing off, you know?
If you're worried so much about it, just cut it off.
Yeah, exactly. Or Paul in Philippians saying like he counts all things as rubbish or dung compared to knowing Jesus, when that's probably a really toned down translation of what he was actually saying, you know? So
filthy rags goes in that too.
Where, Isaiah.
Yeah.
So that's Old Testament.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that is a disgusting image of filthy menstrual rags. Like that is gross. And so there is that foul language, but sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, I think it's just a matter of, I think a lot of times it's just coming back to a lot of what we've already been talking about on this podcast, where it's like, read the Bible, read it in context, and try and get to the bottom of whether there actually is any weight to some of the things that we've always been taught, or whether like the Bible doesn't even have anything to say about that necessarily being sinful or wrong. Mm-hmm. And it's like, that would be different. All the examples we're talking about would be different from something like pornography, which at its very center violates the very basic command of loving your neighbor as yourself by making someone less than the sum of their humanity for personal pleasure, and also supporting the modern day slavery of human trafficking, right? There's a whole other level of that. But those kinds of things, there's definitely biblical precedent for, and there's direct harm being done to the great commandment in that situation. So while a lot of the things that we consume weren't around in Jesus's day, we have to look at the most core fundamental biblical commands and ask ourselves, is this a hill worth dying on, or does even the Bible not treat this as a big deal in the same way that I am? And again, the way you get that is by coming back to the Bible and reading it in context.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I think is really interesting about this is when we do that, when we say X is completely wrong, always, totally, always, and forever, when the Bible doesn't say that it is, then we end up putting ourselves in really bad situations in both witnessing to people outside of the church and also with raising up our children. I mean, I'm thinking of, what is it? Is it Footloose? Footloose. Yeah. So Footloose is the movie where like the town's super conservative evangelical and dancing is prohibited because it's against the Bible. And David dances before the Lord and the Lord doesn't kill him. He doesn't strike down. It's one of the times David is doing a positive thing and showing like reverence for the Lord and showing joy. So when somebody hears, oh, well, dancing is wrong, and then they go back and they're reading in, Samuel, and they're like, wait a second, David's dancing right there. And God doesn't immediately say that's wrong and rebuke him. So like we put ourselves in terrible positions, like that funny Paul, Timothy, wine fake contradiction thing I've talked about before and referenced earlier. Like we make the Bible contradict itself where it doesn't contradict itself. And then when people are like, the Bible contradicts itself, they have this piece of evidence that, while incorrect, actually, according to the text, it feels right to them. And they've even had a Christian person affirm this to them. So they're like, well, if this Christian pastor says this, then I guess that's right. And they've just acknowledged a contradiction in the text. So why would I believe this? So we put ourselves in bad positions when we take extra hard stances on things like that.
It's just it's interesting to me because in all of this, right, there is the concept of being a stumbling block that Paul talks about in Romans, right? So if an alcoholic comes to your house, that's not the time to practice Christian liberty with, some Jim Beam. Like it is actually, in what looks like in Romans is that you were doing something sinful in that, right? And so it's hard to know, but I think in this conversation and in a lot of conversations, we look for Jesus to just give us these blanket rules, right? And we tried that in the 10 Commandments and it didn't work. We were terrible at it. We messed it up before Moses got down the bleeping mountain, and so Jesus comes and on the Sermon on the Mount is talking through that. And it's just like, hey, by the way, it's me now. It's a relationship with me. In Matthew 5, where he's kind of riffing off these things, you've heard it say, don't murder, 10 commandment. But I say, Jesus being the new focus, being the fulfilled focus of that. And so if we are looking for these blanket rules, then we don't understand what the Bible is, and we don't understand who Christ is, because it's not about blanket rules. Otherwise, Jesus would have healed every leper the same way. He would have healed every blind person the same way, but instead he treats people differently because he himself is an actual being with an actual character and an actual personality. And while, yes, there are those don't murder, right? That doesn't seem like, that's a blanket rule. Don't murder people. But then when it comes to something like, drinking a beer or getting a tattoo or going to a casino, like that is a person-to-person basis based off your relationship with Christ. And my pastor has a great analogy where he drew a box, right? And he said, most of the time we want to pretend like Christianity is this box. And we say, what is in this box that we are allowed to follow Christ in? And he went to the edge of the box and he said, most of us will try to live right here, right on the edge of the box, right? How much can we get away with without actually sinning? And then he flipped the page and he just drew a dot in the center of the page. And he said, when in actuality, what the Bible teaches and what we need to be striving for is that we draw one sinner in our entire life. It's like a compass with the north. And we just try to follow that. We ask everything and we filter everything through, is this holy? And if Christ was to come back right now and catch me doing this, would he rebuke me or would he sit down with me? Right. And if I stand before God and God asks me why, like, am I going to be able to truthfully look at him and say, this is honoring to you? And so for me personally, sitting across the table with somebody drinking a beer with him is honoring to Christ in my eyes because of that evangelistic opportunity, but more without even an agenda, just getting to know somebody and building a relationship, where some of my mentors and my teachers view that as a completely wrong thing because in their eyes, it leads down a sinful path. And I'm not calling them wrong. And I don't think they should call me wrong, but like, it's just, it as Jesus treats us differently, and as it is about a relationship, it kind of varies from case to case, but too often we don't like to call ourselves out. So we use that as an excuse to do terrible things.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, guys. I think what I'll do really quick is, so we'll shift a little bit and we'll do a quick just lightning round of stances on topics we'll probably disagree on. So again, just some examples of things that we've been talking about and what are some of our own like personal either struggles with this or things that we've learned about it or things that we might have thought in one direction but we've changed our minds on over time, whatever it might be. And we'll run down the list a little bit, and then after that we'll talk about what kind of like obligation do we have when we start addressing this with other people. Like what is a wise way of loving those who disagree with us on our stance on those things. So here we go. Lightning round. Alcohol. We talked a little bit about this, of course. We've talked a little bit about all these, but
for me, I think you need to be disciplined in a drink limit, but I don't think that it is. People call Jesus a drunkard. He turned water into wine. The communion, kind of a big deal. But like, I think for discipline reasons, and again, here you don't want to make a blanket statement. I'm not adding anything to the scriptures. I think that you as a human being need to limit yourself. So like, my wife and I have limited ourselves to 1 beer an hour because that's the driver license test, right? And like, that's what we try to follow because I weigh 220 pounds. I could drink multiple beers an hour and not get drunk, but it's about the spirit of it, right? So I don't have a problem with alcohol, but I think it needs to be very well disciplined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Same thing. I think the line is getting drunk because that is explicitly stated as being a negative, for whatever reasons of sort of clouding your mind and keeping you, sort of getting rid of all your inhibitions and keeping you from being able to honor God in your conduct in the world. And this is something I've moved on because sort of like that's always been my breakdown after I've sort of dealt with how I was raised believing drinking was always bad. Someone in my family had a drinking problem and I was around them when I was, and they were drunk and I didn't like what that did to people. So I was like, that's not something I'm going to do. And in fact, I didn't have any alcohol for my entire life until the toast at my own wedding when I was 22 years old. And I've moved on that, but I still, a part of it is taste, but another part of it is I don't want to put myself in that sort of position. Is I don't drink what many people would think of as real alcohol. I drink almost exclusively ciders that are apple flavored. So some people would say I don't drink at all. Some people might say I drink too much. I don't know who those people would be. But yeah, I've moved on this, but I think the ultimate line is don't get drunk. But ultimately, and this is probably going to be the answer with all these, is know yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll reiterate just similar things to what you all have said, where some of the best conversations I've ever had with anyone have been over beers. and just hanging out and getting to have that face-to-face interaction, and like being able to do it in a way that's like, like you were saying, John, it's not confronting somebody with like, let's just stare at each other for 2 hours and talk about our emotions. It's something to do. And yeah, I don't know. I've gone through a few different phases of this on myself. Like in high school, I definitely like looked down on anybody who was drinking. I mean, I think that was definitely a predisposition of my own heart. And then, moving to Colorado and stuff, I mean, everybody's grabbing beers and stuff. It's like, for me, after I basically reached the age to like drink it legally, I didn't have any like kind of cap or limit to myself or anything. But like going through the divorce and everything, there would be times where I'm like, this sucks. And like cracking open something just to like cope with something difficult. And I think that was a rough time, as far as my stance on alcohol, because I think I've come around on it a lot more since then, and just basically like I don't have any draw to it. Like whenever I get stressed or anxious or anything, it's not something that like immediately occurs to me, I need this. But in those moments, it was like I was using it as a coping mechanism, and that to me felt too far, as opposed to like this is a social thing and I'm trying to like hang out and get to know people better, and we're having a good time, that kind of thing. So I think context is important. I think for me personally, definitely come around on, setting in place limits and just making sure, like, again, like Sage, you were saying, know yourself, know your limits, and also be wary of other people who are in the room who might actually have a legitimate problem with it. It seems like a fun idea for like a small group to like bond over a beer or something like that, but we don't really know like anybody's family history. Like it's important to like make sure we are respectful of that too. So I don't know, it's again one of those things, just like all the things on this list, where it's like use it in some situations. It's not always wise to, or to push the limits, or just do it in moderation, essentially. So okay, that was the first one. Strong language is number 2.
So I think, like you said, a lot of this depends on the people around us. So considering other people's sensibilities, that's part of what Christian liberty is we use this freedom to glorify God, even in our disagreements. So the incorrect thing would be to curse in front of my mother, which I would absolutely never do. So I think it definitely depends. People who would be bothered by the language, you shouldn't use the language around. But, I talk very differently when I'm with my mom than, when we are playing Rocket League and I just gave up another goal. So like totally company specific, I think.
Yeah. I think for me, it's hard. With these kind of things, it's hard to see what's a conviction and what's a preference, right? Mm-hmm. For me, I'm somebody who, like, when I start cussing, I cuss a lot. And then I have to, like, really reel it in and try not to, right? Like, I remember almost cussing one time in a sermon just because I was so amped up, right?
Yeah.
And then realized that was awful. Like, luckily I didn't, but it was close. Like, it was like my brain said, say it. My mouth started to form. And then, like, I caught myself and just stuttered. But so something like that, then you have to reevaluate some stuff. But yeah, I don't think cussing every other word is holy. But at the same time, if you really struggle, or if you really are against it, I understand. But there are those instances, and with Paul and Isaiah, where you just kind of like, I mean, like it seems pretty clear that they're being intentionally vulgar here to make a point.
People would have clutched pearls upon reading that.
Yes.
Would have.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think for me, this is one of the things I have the loosest grip on, and just I definitely consider the company I'm with. I think that's important, obviously. Obviously I would not talk the same way around like my grandmother as I would around you guys while playing Rocket League or just hanging out and having a good time and catching up with friends and things like that.
I don't know. I think your grandmother's pretty cool. I think she'd be fine with it.
Oh, thank you. How do you know her? Anyways, moving on.
From Rocket League.
From Rocket League. That's right. Oh, you guys are friends. Forgot about that. Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I even look at it in the sense of like, well, first, like strong situations call for strong language. I've found sometimes there really isn't like a better thing to say about something that's really horrible happening in the world. And sometimes there also are situations where it does loosen up a room a little bit. It brings people together. Like I know, like working in Colorado in a job where every single person I worked with was not a Christian, being able to like, for them to know I'm a Christian, but also have the layer of like, I don't take myself like incredibly seriously about this, or like I don't like look down on them for saying those things, I think was a good starting point. And it also opened up a lot of conversations that I don't think I would have had otherwise. And so I see the usefulness of it even, but at the same time, again, consider where you're at and don't constantly do it. Movies and TV. I guess you could rope music into this too, just general entertainment consumption.
Yeah, so this one I've changed on a lot. I used to be very kind of theologically liberal with it and, watch anything, watch everything. But lately I've become kind of a pearl clutcher. And I'm not saying that everybody has to be, obviously. But I do think we watch a lot of things that are not helpful. I know for any guy listening to this podcast, there's really no reason for you to be watching anything with naked women. It's just not a good idea, and I mean, at least where you need to figure out how to avert your eyes pretty well. Because it's not holy, and it leads down a bad path pretty quickly. That being said, like, it's really hard to find a good TV show or a good movie that does not have, things that would be considered issues with the most conservative of Christian faith. And so if you're just a fan of quality, you're going to have to learn to get over some of that stuff. So I don't know. I come down, like my wife and I don't watch much of anything anymore. Mainly because like there's nothing there. If there's a lot of sex scenes in it, then we're done. And so like the way I phrase it now is like, growing up I watched Game of Thrones, but I would never rewatch Game of Thrones now. And like that's kind of the shift that I've made. And so it's very inconvenient because again, there's not a lot of good clean shows.
It's true.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny. I've gone in like the reverse situation here. So in high school, especially, I talked about it before, shortly after, like right before getting saved, and then a little bit after, I had this sort of legalistic, like I only need to listen to good stuff and watch good TV shows and things like that. And then, I don't know, there was a certain point where I was like, maybe I've been wrong about Kendrick Lamar this whole time. And there are a couple of songs, the titles of which I can't even, one especially, the title of which I can't say on air because, company. I don't want to curse in front of our podcast listeners. There's just so many things like that because I've had that opinion, because I've been the prude who won't listen to or watch things, I've missed out on some unbelievable quality that ultimately helped me be a better Christian. There's for example, the song Swimming Pools by Kendrick Lamar. So I used to think when that first came out, oh, this is a song about getting drunk. I don't care about this. I'm out. And then, of course, I listened to it later, and I'm like, oh, this is a song about him talking about alcohol destroying his family and how it's like not a good thing that's happening. And I've learned to be very quick. This is the best thing about streaming is you can fast forward whatever you want. So, Jamie and I also watch Game of Thrones. And thankfully, there were fewer and fewer sex scenes.
It really did. It tapered down. Yeah.
Yeah, because like I started in season 4 and there was like 1 or 2. And then, it got to a point where there just weren't any because they had so much story that they could not fit into the number of episodes they had, that they had to cut all of it out. And then I went back and watched the first couple of seasons because I wanted to see the whole thing. I've read all the books. I'm a huge fan of the source material. It's great. It's our generation's Lord of the Rings, but dirtier. And I was shocked. I did a lot of fast forwarding through season 1. So that's big for me, is always fast forward through any sex scene or anything like that. That's, I've had issues with pornography in the past, but I, haven't watched porn in like over 2 years at this point. So that's something that I have gotten very good at over time. I've built up the skills needed to avoid that stuff. But as I've become more liberal in my view of the arts, and this is partly because, I'm an aspiring screenwriter, I've written, a short film or 2, I'm working on all sorts of projects, I love quality filmmaking, because even war films that, you wouldn't watch can make you think differently about the human experience in a way that you wouldn't have before. That honestly, I've watched some like existentially negative movies that most people be like, this is depressing. And I find beauty in it. And I somehow love Jesus more afterwards because he steps into the world that I'm watching and gives us a way out of it. So like, for me, like I said, I've gotten a lot more liberal when it comes to that. But once again, know yourself. If you can't trust yourself to skip through the sex scenes, don't watch the shows that have the sex scenes.
Yeah, it's funny, like John, you and Sage move in like the total opposite direction for that. And I feel like this is the one that I think I've probably changed the least. Like, so like hardly any change at all. I just think that, that I've always just consumed whatever. I mean, like if there was something that friends were interested in and they told me I should go watch, I would. I think when I was married, I was definitely much more conscious, and still am to this day. I think that was one of the good things about, obviously, like, getting into a serious relationship and everything, is just being like, hey, some of this stuff actually is very, very harmful. And as someone who also had a lifelong struggle with pornography, and I never consider myself far enough removed from it to where it will never be a problem again, I try to be careful with that now. So, nudity and sex specifically. Anything else, I've pretty much always kind of consumed. And I haven't questioned it too much, which I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. But I don't know. It might be worth looking into that. Yeah, so that's entertainment. And then last one on our list, and then we'll do our last question and then move into email land and wrap it up. Tattoos.
So this is one that I've thought a lot about and done some research on myself, because this is one of those things that's sort of enemies of the faith, and I mean that by not a person who's an atheist, but someone who's an anti-theist, so someone who hates religion in all of its forms and want to attack and degrade Christianity because they think it's a bad thing. So there are things they go to. They're like, hey, do you have shirts that have different kinds of fabric sewn together? Well, you're not paying attention to the Bible. And, like, oh, do you eat shellfish? Well, that's bad too. You can't do that. And of course, covenant theology aside, that would completely answer all of those questions.
And Galatians and Colossians and Jesus's life and ministry.
Yeah. So all of that aside, which we can talk about at a later date, one of the things that people talk about is tattoos. And I have actually heard a Christian who I knew talk about tattoos and say they've considered it, but they don't want to go to hell. It's totally serious.
Oof.
They think just the getting of a tattoo means they would go to hell. So I don't have the verse right on hand, and this is something maybe we can revisit in a future episode. But in the Old Testament, it's given somewhere in the law that Hebrews are not to put marks on their bodies, which would be whatever the equivalent, to tattooing was of that day. As I understand it, as I've done more and more research on it, so a lot of what the law ultimately was creating a distinction to sanctify, to set apart the Hebrews, the future nation of Israel, from the Canaanites around them. And these markings on their skin would be basically as a method of worshiping their idol, so worshiping their God. So the idea is not that ball number on your shoulder, is sinful, but that you shouldn't get a tattoo of Asherah or Baal on your body to worship a false god. So that's the idea, as I understand it, that's being communicated there. It's not the marking of the skin. It is what is represented by the marking of the skin. I know a whole bunch of people who have had very close loved ones die, and they get, like a name, the person's name, and then, their birth date and death date sort of thing. Like that's not sinful. That's you're doing it in memory of someone you love. And people get Bible verses tattooed on themselves. Could you imagine if getting John 3:16 tattooed on your forearm got you sent to hell? That seems odd. That seems strange. So that's sort of my background understanding of sort of the cultural context of what's happening there in the Old Testament. So if you're let's say, when do I think tattoos are too, you take the tattooing too far? If it's an idolatrous activity. So if you're doing it to worship another god, that's not good. If you get too many tattoos and it becomes, like anything can be, an idolatrous activity of you're worshiping the act of getting tattoos, that would also be a problem, as video gaming or watching too much TV or, overeating or whatever you could possibly, anything that you could possibly overdo. If that's what you're doing with tattooing, that would be sinful as well. But in general, tattoos in and of themselves, I would not say are sinful.
I hope not, because I have a couple. And if I get sent to hell for my tattoos, I'll be bummed, because one's a Bible verse and one is the 3 crosses. And the 3 crosses specifically is like any theological paradigm you have breaks down with the thief on the cross, because he wasn't baptized. He didn't know the words. He simply looked at Jesus and was like, "Hey man, can I come with you?" Jesus was like, "Yep." And it was that simple. So
he read no Calvin,
no
Calvin, Luther,
shocking,
Luther.
None of it.
Right. And so like that's a reminder for myself, all that kind of stuff. But it really is just like, I don't know. It's funny to me because my wife and I had to hide it for a while, because we both got tattoos of our callings. Like we were very adamant that God gave us our callings through these verses, because we want to anchor everything in Scripture. So we got those tattooed on us as our first tattoo. And we had to hide it, which was hilarious. We've got like these 2 scripture passages tattooed very smallly on us. And we're so terrified that people are going to find out. Just like, what are we doing? And so, I don't know, it became like a point for us to be like, you know what, we're not hiding this again, because like, the idea that we're going to stand before a most holy God, and he's going to be like, I know that you tried every single day to worship me with your entire being, that you were obedient even when it was hard, that you know me and that you love me, but you have a tattoo.
You have a tattoo of a cross on your wrist.
Yeah. You shouldn't have done that, so now you must be separated from me from eternity. I don't know. No. Something strikes me as odd.
Yeah. Of all the ones on this list, I don't have anything else to add. I think you all hit the nail on the head. I think.
By the way, sorry to interrupt. When Jesus comes back in Revelation, he has written on his thigh, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So more than likely, Christ is tatted up.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, of all the ones on this list, this was the one that I always, like, from the very beginning was like, that's such a ridiculous thing to get hung up on.
Yeah.
But
Also, sidebar, for comedy purposes, I have considered in the past getting a barcode from an Italian cut green bean can tattooed somewhere on my body,
for comedy?
just for comedy purposes. One day somebody will be like, oh, nice barcode. Can I scan it? And then they'll scan it and think they won't get anything. And then boom, I'm a can of Italian cut green beans. I win. It's a joke that may never even happen, but it would be so worth it if it did.
Oh, wow.
Sidebar over, by the way.
Sidebar over. Okay, perfect. All right, so running short on time. So last question. We'll go through this one pretty quick. What obligation do we have when we address this topic with others, and how do we love people who disagree with us on our stance on those things?
I think we've touched on that. So don't curse in front of people who are going to be bothered by it. It's all in the ultimate goal of loving our neighbor, of loving the other people in the body of Christ and those outside of it. Is don't intentionally like try to make people angry and uncomfortable. Sometimes people will get angry and uncomfortable by the gospel. But I feel like I've said this before, but my ethic in trying to figure out how to live the Christian life is I am okay with someone being offended by the gospel, by Jesus dying on the cross to save us from our sins. I'm okay with that being offensive. I don't want people to be offended by the way I yell or my harsh presentation of this beautiful thing. Let the content be what is offensive to people. Don't let the presentation, because we don't give God enough room to work. Not that he needs that much, honestly, but we don't do God justice to the extent that we can when we do that. People will, Matt Chandler's made the joke before that he can't believe that people got saved in the 80s because Christian music was so bad. Like, we should make better music. But like, we have to do the best we can to at least try to present this in a way that is honoring to God. The presentation has to be as honoring as the content does. So I think as we move and act in the world, we need to be conscious of our surroundings, and not just because we think something. We shouldn't do something because we think wrong. We shouldn't do something because it might hurt someone or put someone in a bad position or have someone question when they shouldn't. We just need to think about other people when we do stuff.
Yeah, and like,
what a shocking idea.
I know.
I know.
Loving your neighbor and loving God. I wish that was written down somewhere. But like that idea of just thinking of others and thinking about God and loving both as hard as you possibly can, being consistent in that and not trying to be fake, right? And so if you are considering others before yourself, but also staying true to who God called you to be, then you will end up serving way more than you're comfortable with, but you'll also tick a lot of people off. My dad said something to me the other day. He said, John, you do realize that if we know who Christ is, then if you're a great leader, you're going to get crucified. Like, it's just what it is. Like, because love and truth, no matter how it's presented with as much grace, can tick people off. And the gospel is offensive. What we've turned it into is be a good boy, don't smoke behind the school, don't raise too much Cain. And what Jesus preaches is love one another at such a ridiculous rate and be so, all in the gospel that it's dangerous. Be salty. And so, I don't know, when it comes to this, don't be a stumbling block. Put others before yourself, but don't be a doormat. Because when Jesus teaches to turn the other cheek, we do have to realize that means you can take a punch. Like if you get slapped and are knocked out, then you can't turn the other cheek. But if you're strong in who you are by being the person that God calls you to be, then when you get smacked, you turn the other cheek because you're still on your feet. So be who you're called to be, and then put others before yourself. And I don't know. I think Christ works through people because he's a God of community, and he's much greater than us. And even in our failures, I mean, heck, read Samson. If we try to do this and we fail, God's still going to get glory out of it, because if he could redeem that jerk, then he can redeem us as well.
Yeah, fair point. Samson sucks, man.
He's the worst.
He is actually kind of the worst.
He's terrible. All right. Well, thank you guys for the conversation, and we are going to jump into email land. Somewhere on an island west of the archipelago, several emails have gathered together to form a nation unto their own, and it was called Email Land. You've now entered Email Land. Let's look at what the email civilians of Email Land are up to today. I have 2 emails this week. One is an update, and one is a question from Cody. All right, from Cody. In regards to last week's question about the difference between a game and a sport, valiant effort, but you were wrong. I have thought it over and come to the perfect conclusion. Both a sport and a game require competing participants to use skill and tact in an attempt to achieve a goal before their opponents can achieve the same or an opposing goal. However, the difference between a sport and game is determined by the participants' multiple aspects of physical preparedness. In a sport, actively working towards improving one or more aspects of physical preparedness, strength, power, endurance, coordination, balance, agility, can significantly increase your likelihood of success. Freeze tag, sport. Video games, game. Poker, game. Pushing a hoop with a stick, sport.
Yes.
Cheerleading, sport. I don't care what the Supreme Court ruled on that one. They are wrong. Checkers, game. Red Rover, sport.
You're doing God's work, Cody.
I'm so proud. That's incredible.
I'm still going concussion or hamstring, but I respect it.
The detail's wonderful.
I'm not arguing. I'm impressed.
Yes. The level of research was impressive.
Absolutely.
Nice.
There are a lot of 90-plus-year-old people who are very proud to finally say that they pushed a hoop with a stick and that was a sport.
That was it. All right. Question. Assume you are dating a girl and she is awesome. It is a wholesome relationship. No hanky-panky, no hand-holding, limited eye contact. Very 1930s. You both think it would be fun to do a 23andMe genome panel. You discover you are cousins. What is the lowest degree of cousinhood, first, second, third, etc., that you would be okay with and remain in the relationship?
0. You can't be a cousin. You can't be. Nope.
Yeah, that's tough.
I'm
from Tennessee.
10 degrees.
I'm from Tennessee, and my family lived in Kentucky before my birth, but I will agree with John and go against what you might have thought that I would say. I want it to be so far removed that no one's even putting a number on it anymore. At the point where no one would say, oh, that's your ex-cousin. If they're saying that, out.
Yeah, you're at least triple digits.
Yes.
I'm going 10. 10 is a safe figure.
I think so. I like to think if we actually broke that down, like I am 10th cousin, like I am 10th cousins with like the president of the United States. Like that's how that works. That's how far removed you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. That's uncomfortable to think about. I think we should move on quickly.
I think we should. It's time to wrap this up. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Please remember that you can send in your questions to be read live on the podcast. However, they don't have to be related to the main topic, as we just saw. You can write in anything you want. They can be connected to the main topic. Ask us whatever you would like clarification on.
You can argue that's connected to the main topic.
You can.
Oh, no, that's old law. We'll pretend like that one's staying.
Oh, man. So please feel free to write in your questions. We would love to answer them live on the podcast. And you can do so at our website, which is bitesizetheology.com/contact. bitesizetheology.com/contact. Please send in your questions. We would love to hear from you. in as much as we want, or it in as much as we want, and as much as we want this to be a relationship, we would like it to be. So feel free to dialogue with us. We'd love to hear from you. All right, we're going to wrap it up. And the last word is going to go to Sage.
So I think the topic of Christian liberty is really important. And the most important thing is not for us to figure out, we should exercise Christian liberty in exercising Christian liberty. So don't find out the freest thing you can do and go do it, because that's the wrong heart to have. The right heart to have when it comes to this situation is not how can I do what I want, but how can I best love the people around me? And that's going to look different depending on who the people you are around. So just when you're thinking about what can I get away with, spoiler alert, that's probably the wrong way to think. Just think about when you act and move in the world, how can I best love the people around me? How can I most honor God? And how can I most reflect love and gentleness in a world that so desperately needs it all the time?
All right. Perfect. Thanks, everybody. Hope you have a good rest of your week, and we'll catch you on the next one.